The day I arrived at my son Mason's house in Flagstaff, he greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, and gave me a soft pat on the back. It felt warm, on the surface, at least. But just 10 minutes later, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs, suitcase in hand, staring down into a cold, dim space that smelled like old paint and dust. Heather, my daughter-in-law, called it temporary. Mason said it was quiet and private. The way they said it, like they had practiced those words, made something inside me feel off. I didn't feel mad, not yet. It was more like a quiet ache, a sense that I wasn't really welcome, like I had landed somewhere I wasn't meant to stay. I had spent 35 years working as a school accountant. Then came 2 long, lonely years after my husband passed. Eventually, I decided it was time to stop living alone. I sold the little house in Oklahoma where we raised our only son, packed up my memories into a few boxes, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Flagstaff. Mason had said it would be great to have me stay for a while. Heather even sent me a thumbs up emoji. That was all I needed to believe this was the right choice. The bus ride was long, but oddly comforting. I watched the scenery change, from flat open land to rolling hills to tall mountains. I imagined sitting on their patio, helping my granddaughter Molly with schoolwork, maybe even cooking Sunday dinners. Again. My heart felt full, hopeful, for the first time in a long while. Mason met me at the station. He looked tired, but glad to see me. He hugged me and made a sweet joke about how I hadn't aged a day. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I needed to. Their house was beautiful, 2 stories, bright white trim, a tidy front yard. I noticed a shiny new SUV in the driveway and wind chimes by the porch that made the gentlest sound. For a moment, I really believed I was home. But as soon as we stepped inside, Heather barely looked up from her laptop. She gave a quick smile and pointed down the hallway. Mason picked up my suitcase and said, "Follow me, Mom." Something in his voice felt off, distant, maybe even rehearsed. He led me down a narrow set of stairs in the back. With every step, the air got cooler. The basement had a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, a thin twin mattress on a metal frame, and a folding chair beside the washer and dryer. I stood there, holding my purse strapped tight, trying to make sense of it all. Mason said the upstairs was being renovated. Heather said the basement had great privacy. I nodded. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. That night, I lay on the thin mattress, listening to the low hum of the water heater. The ceiling was unfinished, just open wooden beams and tangled pipes. The air smelled like damp carpet and old laundry. There was no window. No clock. No sound from upstairs. Only the soft buzz of the bulb and the occasional drip from an old pipe. I closed my eyes and told myself this was just temporary, maybe a week or 2. Maybe the setup was easier for them. Maybe they really were fixing the upstairs. I didn't need much. A bed. A blanket. Just a small space where I could feel safe. But the way they led me straight to the basement, without a pause or question, stayed with me. Like a tiny splinter under the skin, easy to miss at first, but impossible to ignore once you feel it. Dinner that night was quiet. Heather made a salad and some kind of quinoa dish. Mason spent most of the meal scrolling on his phone. Molly barely looked up from her tablet. I tried asking her about school, but before she could say anything, Heather jumped in, saying Molly was focusing. After dinner, Heather reminded Molly to finish her vegetables, and that was the end of our conversation. When I brought my plate to the sink, Heather gently waved me off. She told me they had a system, everyone cleaned their own dishes. So I rinsed my plate, wiped it down, and placed it where I thought it went. But Heather watched me like I had done something wrong, like I had broken a rule I didn't even know existed. Later that night, I quietly walked upstairs to get a glass of water. The house was dark and still. As I passed their bedroom, I heard their voices behind the closed door. At first it was just a soft mumble, but then Mason's voice got louder. He said he was tired and needed space. Heather's voice came next, quieter but sharper. I heard words like boundaries and pressure. I stopped in my tracks. I didn't want to hear any more, so I turned around and went back downstairs. Back in the basement, I sat on the edge of the thin mattress with the water glass in my hands. That's when I noticed the door at the top of the stairs had a lock. It was small, and it turned inward, locking from the outside. I wasn't sure if it had always been there, or if someone had turned it after I came back down. That thought sat heavy in my chest. I barely slept that night. My body ached from the trip, but the deeper pain was something else. I had come here hoping to feel connected again, to feel like I mattered. Instead, I felt invisible. And maybe even worse than that, I felt unnecessary. Like an old chair someone didn't want to throw away yet, so they just pushed it into a corner. By the third morning, I had found a quiet little routine. I'd wake up early, before anyone else, tiptoe upstairs to make coffee, and sit on the back porch. I'd come back down as soon as I heard movement above me, like I had never been there at all. It was easier that way. That morning, Heather caught me rinsing a few dishes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her face said everything. She stood there, arms folded, her polished fingernails tapping against her elbow. She said again that they had a system. Boundaries, she repeated. I nodded, dried my hands, and stepped aside. Later, I overheard her talking to Mason. She said I was making her feel crowded, and maybe it was time to talk about expectations. I kept trying to stay out of the way. I took out the trash. I helped Molly with her spelling. I folded laundry no one asked me to fold. But somehow, the more I did, the more Heather seemed uncomfortable, like every small thing I did felt like I was invading her space. That afternoon, I offered to pay for the week's groceries. It felt like the right thing to do. Mason smiled and said thank you. Heather didn't say anything. A few hours later, she handed me a printed list at the kitchen island. Everything was typed up, item by item, with prices down to the last cent. At the bottom, there was a note, optional. Support, roof repair, $8,000. Next to it, in parentheses, she had written, not urgent but appreciated. I folded the list and quietly put it in my bag. No one brought it up again. That night at dinner, Heather mentioned that Molly needed a new laptop for school, something reliable, maybe around $1,200. Then Mason said the brakes on his car were going bad, probably another $600, maybe more. He looked tired when he said it. He didn't come out and ask, but he didn't need to. I nodded and said I'd help however I could. They both smiled, but Heather's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. After dinner, I started clearing the table, but Heather stepped in quickly. We'll take care of it, she said, handing me a wine glass and gently motioning toward the patio. I stood outside in the cool air, listening through the screen door. Their voices were low and calm. Heather's voice said, I thought she'd catch on faster. Mason replied, give it time. Heather said the basement was working for now, but if they wanted the rest, they'd have to move faster. I didn't know what that meant, the rest, not yet. But something inside me started to understand. That quiet, tired part of me that had learned how to listen without speaking, how to smile when my heart was aching, that part started to see the truth. I wasn't being welcomed. I was being managed. Not with yelling or meanness, but with silence, planning, and a firm hand I wasn't supposed to notice. That week, something shifted in me. I started to see things differently, more clearly. All the polite smiles, the soft voices, the careful wording, they weren't kindness. They were tactics. It wasn't about making me feel welcome. It was about keeping everything smooth, quiet, under control. The days unfolded in a strange rhythm, small, quiet requests that never felt like requests. First, Heather sent a text with a grocery list. Then Mason gently reminded me that Molly's school fundraiser was coming up and they needed to buy raffle tickets. A few days later, a car repair estimate appeared neatly on the kitchen counter, no note, no words, just waiting for me to see it. No one came right out and asked, but each slip of paper felt heavy, like it carried a silent expectation. I kept telling myself it was fine, normal, even. Parents help their kids. And I could afford it, at least for now. It was easier to say yes than to say no. Still, something didn't sit right. It wasn't about the money, it was the pattern. Every gentle ask came wrapped in a smile or a compliment. And every kind word seemed to come with a price tag. I paid for the fundraiser. I left cash for the car repair. I handed Heather a check when she casually mentioned the home insurance was due. She always said thank you, but in the same quick, flat way you thank a barista for your coffee, polite, but distant. Like it didn't really matter. One afternoon, while folding towels, I overheard Mason on the phone. He was in another room, but the sound carried through the wall vent. He was talking to someone about payments and said they had support from family now. That his mom was staying for a while and it was working out. I didn't know who he was talking to, but I knew what it meant. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a resource. That night, Heather sent me a link to a budgeting spreadsheet. My name was in the top corner. It had sections like household contribution, utilities, grocery adjustments. Everything was neatly typed, totaled down to the penny. I stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the laptop. I didn't reply. Instead, I made dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes with garlic, a fresh salad with homemade dressing. The kind of meal that fills a house with real warmth. Mason said it reminded him of his childhood. Heather didn't say much, but she had 2 servings. Molly smiled, for the first time that week. Later that evening, Heather sent another message. A Venmo request, $800. The note said, simply, monthly balance. I just sat there staring at it. The chicken hadn't even cooled in the fridge, and already I was back to being a number. I didn't respond. That night, lying in the dark basement, I started adding things up in my head. Since I arrived, I had given nearly $3,000. Not in one big moment. Just bit by bit, quietly, like a slow leak in a roof you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. They hadn't taken advantage of me with yelling or demands. They did it with politeness, with timing, with silence. The kind of pressure that doesn't leave bruises, just an emptiness where trust used to live. It was just after 9 p.m. when I stepped into the kitchen that night. The house was dark except for a soft light glowing under Mason and Heather's bedroom door. I moved the way I always did, quiet, careful, invisible. I only wanted a glass of water. But as I passed the hallway vent, I heard my name. Their bedroom door wasn't fully closed. Just slightly open, enough for sound to slip through. Heather's voice was calm, almost cold. She said they needed to make a decision soon. That the house wouldn't stay in her name unless they acted fast. Mason answered something about timing, that they had to be subtle. That if they pushed too hard, it could backfire. Heather's voice cut in again, firmer this time, she won't be around forever. I froze. The words hit me like a splash of cold water. They weren't arguing. They weren't whispering. This wasn't a fight. It was a plan. I backed away, pressing myself against the hallway wall. My hand was shaking around the glass. They were talking about the house. My house. The one I helped them buy almost 20 years ago, back when Mason's credit was destroyed from a failed business loan. The mortgage had gone in my name, just for a while, I had told myself. Just until things got stable. But that refinance never happened. And I never pushed it. And now I was seeing the cost of that silence. The next morning, after they left for work, I waited until the house was still. Then I went to my suitcase, unzipped the lining at the bottom, and pulled out the folder I had kept hidden. Inside were the original mortgage papers, proof of ownership, the name on every line. My name was still right there on the documents, easy to see, untouched, no changes, no signatures moving it to someone else. I stared at those papers and thought back to the day Mason had signed them, his hands shaking, his face full of gratitude. I was proud then. I really thought I was giving him a good start, helping him build a strong life. But after hearing their late-night talk, I saw things more clearly. I wasn't really part of the family. I was just a name on a page. A form waiting to be used when it was convenient. That afternoon, Heather came home all cheerful, like nothing was wrong. She asked if I wanted to help plan Molly's birthday, said they were thinking about having a barbecue in the backyard. I smiled and said yes, pretending everything was fine. But later, when no one was around, I slipped the folder back into my suitcase and zipped it shut. This time, I made sure the zipper handle was easy to grab, not because I was planning to leave right away, but because I finally knew this part of my life wasn't open anymore. The door hadn't slammed shut, but it was cracked just enough to let the truth through. Just enough for me to finally see how they really felt about me. And from now on, I'd be watching, eyes wide open. That night, I couldn't sleep. The basement felt heavier somehow, like even the air knew something had changed. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the low hum of the water heater, the soft creaks in the pipes. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. It was something quieter, like shock that had settled deep in my chest. All day, their words had played over and over in my head. The way Heather said it so casually, that I wouldn't be around forever. Like I was just a space filler. Like my name on the house was a problem they were waiting to outlive. I didn't give them that house because I had to. I did it because I believed we were building something real together. A family. I believed that's what mothers do, we give so our children can rise. We step aside so they can take the lead. But nobody tells you what to do when they stop looking back to see if you're okay. Early the next morning, I stood in the middle of the basement and looked around. The walls were rough and unfinished, the drywall old and marked with time. In one corner, I spotted a faint red line Mason had drawn when he was a kid. It was still there, just above my hip. Next to it, a smudged date in crayon, the year he turned 11, the year he broke his arm falling out of that tree, and cried in my arms for what felt like forever. I ran my fingers over the line and felt something inside me shift, not exactly pain, more like remembering something I'd almost forgotten. I wasn't just some woman crashing in their basement. This used to be my home. I helped build this place. I laid tile in the kitchen with my own hands. My paycheck kept the lights on when they were just starting out. This basement used to be filled with laughter. It was a playroom once, a place Mason whispered his dreams into the floorboards. Now, it felt like a waiting room. And I had let it get this far, one smile, one quiet nod, one check at a time. Not because I was naive. But because I truly believed love would be enough. That morning, I made coffee like always, but didn't drink it. I just sat there at the table while the house was still quiet. The sun was just beginning to rise. Heather's labeled jars sparkled in the window light. Mason's keys were in their usual bowl by the fridge. I looked around and realized it didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a stage set. Everything carefully placed. Every word, every moment, rehearsed. It had been a long time since I felt like their mom. Even longer since I felt like a guest. Now I felt like a threat. And I knew what came next. Not the fight. Not yet. First came the sweet talk. Then the favors. Then the paperwork. But this time? I'd be ready. By the end of that week, something inside me had gone quiet. Not broken. Not empty. Just quiet, like the sound a door makes when it finally closes. And you stop waiting for it to open again. They didn't notice the change. I still made coffee. Still picked up groceries. Still helped Molly with her spelling. Still smiled and nodded when Heather talked about how tight money had gotten. But I was listening differently now. Not to what they said, but to everything they didn't. They never asked if I was comfortable. They didn't ask how I felt about all the budgeting spreadsheets or the constant Venmo requests. And not once did they ask if I missed having a home of my own. They just assumed I didn't, because they thought I had nowhere else to go. That was their first mistake. The second? Thinking I had no fight left in me. One morning, after they left for work, I sat down at the table with that same old folder. I laid everything out: mortgage papers, tax bills, the original deed with my name clear as day, my own handwriting, the signature that had made it all official. I took pictures of every single page and saved them to a flash drive, just in case. Then I carefully packed the papers back into the folder, tucked it in my suitcase, and zipped it shut. I wasn't leaving yet, but I wanted to be ready. Then I made a phone call to a lawyer. Not some fancy firm, just an old friend of my late husband's. He'd helped us refinance the house years ago. He remembered me right away and asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine, though I wasn't calling to chat. I needed to know what it would take to regain legal control of the house, since it was still in my name. His voice got serious. He asked a few questions, then said, "Honestly? Not much at all." I wrote down every word, folded the note, and tucked it into my wallet. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I cleaned the kitchen like always. I scrubbed the sink, wiped the counters, stacked the dishwasher. Then I turned out the light and stood there in the dark for a while, letting my eyes adjust. It was quiet upstairs, but not a peaceful kind of quiet. More like the kind that creeps in when people think no one's paying attention. Back in the basement, I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Nothing dramatic, just a list. What I'd paid for since I moved in. What I still had in the bank. What steps I'd take if I had to act. And you know what? It felt good. Putting it all down. Seeing it clearly. Knowing I hadn't imagined the way things had shifted. The way my space, my say, my place, had slowly been taken from me. I didn't write it because I was mad. I wrote it because facts matter, especially when people around you start twisting things. What I'd really been missing wasn't comfort. It wasn't even kindness. It was control. And bit by bit, I was getting it back. A few days later, Heather invited me for tea on a Wednesday morning. She said she had a break between yoga clients and thought it'd be nice to catch up. She smiled that polished smile of hers, the one that looks warm if you don't look too closely. I agreed without hesitation. I already knew what this was. She set the table out on the patio, everything laid out just so. Pretty floral napkins, matching teacups, lemon cookies from that bakery downtown. She poured the tea with care, first for me, then for herself. We chatted for a while, Molly's reading scores, the school's new tech rules, how groceries were getting more expensive. Again, all small talk. I knew that rhythm by now. You ease and soft, so the real ask doesn't feel like a blow. And then it came. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Everything inside was neatly labeled: financial forms, refinance requests, even a form giving her full control over the house. She didn't call it that, of course. She used soft words like simplify and streamline. She said it would help the household run more smoothly, take the pressure off Mason. I gently stirred my tea. Let the spoon clink once against the cup. Then I looked her right in the eye and said, "No, not angry. Not cold. Just clear." She blinked, surprised. Then she tried again. Said Mason had been under so much stress. Said it was just a formality. Something to make life easier. I told her I believed that. I also believed she was hoping I'd just smile, nod, and sign, like I always had. But not this time. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the deed, not the original, just the backup I'd made for this exact moment. I placed it right on top of her envelope. She looked down at it. And for the first time since I moved in, Heather didn't have a single thing to say. I told her they had 30 days. I was reclaiming the house. She and Mason would need to find another place to live. I said it gently. No shouting. No threats. Just the truth. She stared at me, then at the tea in front of her, now going cold. And something in her shifted, not broken, not slumped. Just less put together than usual. She picked up the envelope, stood up, and walked back into the house without saying a single word. I stayed on the patio a little longer, holding my teacup, even though the tea had gone cold. The sun had shifted in the sky, and a longer shadow stretched across the patio, covering me. I let it. I closed my eyes. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally taking a breath I'd been holding in since the day I arrived. And now, I could finally let it out. The next morning, Mason found me in the kitchen. He walked in already tense, holding a thick folder full of papers. No, good morning, no, how did you sleep? Just the folder, which he slid across the counter toward me. I didn't reach for it. He said Heather had told him about the talk we had on the patio. He said I misunderstood, that they were only trying to plan for the future. That I was blowing it all out of proportion. His voice was tight and low, like he was holding back something, anger, fear, maybe both. I let him speak. Then I told him calmly, I didn't misunderstand anything. He looked at me differently then. Like someone who suddenly realizes they've been walking the wrong path. Then his voice got louder. He said I had betrayed him. That I was tearing his family apart. That this house felt more like theirs than mine. I didn't argue. I opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope I had prepared the night before, and laid it next to his. Inside was a detailed list of everything I'd paid for since moving in, dates, amounts, categories. It wasn't to shame him or stir up guilt. It was just the truth, written down plainly. He didn't open it. I reminded him how I'd once signed the mortgage to help him start a life. How I stood by him during hard times, when his credit was wrecked, when the job didn't work out, when the bills stacked up and he didn't know what to do. I reminded him that I picked up the phone when the bank called, that I answered the door when collectors came knocking. But I also told him that helping someone doesn't mean disappearing for them. That supporting someone doesn't mean being silent. And being a mother doesn't mean turning into a wallet with no face, no voice, no limits. He didn't say a word. Just stared at the folder like it might somehow fix everything. I told him those 30 days weren't meant as punishment. They were a boundary. I wasn't asking for anything back. I wasn't getting revenge. I was just stepping out of a role I never signed up to play forever. I told him I'd still help where it made sense. I'd still be there for Molly in all the ways that mattered. But I wasn't going to keep paying for a life while being treated like some silent investor no one even remembered to thank. That's when he looked at me, really looked. And there wasn't anger in his eyes anymore. Just something quieter. Something tired. He gave a small nod, picked up his folder, and walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just poured myself a cup of coffee, took it to the table, and sat down. The morning sun streamed through the window. The kitchen still felt like the same old place, but something had shifted. It felt like mine again, in a way that mattered. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. And that was enough. Mason didn't talk to me for 2 days. Not out of spite. Just silence. The kind that spreads through a house without a sound. It sat in the air, in the corners of every room, like fog. Heather, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She still left her empty smoothie cups on the counter. Still typed away on her laptop with that calm, clipped focus she always had. Still talked in that even tone, even when she wasn't happy. But I noticed the way she glanced at Mason, short, sharp looks. He never looked back. On the third morning, I found him in the garage. The door was open, and he was standing there by the workbench, staring at a pile of tangled extension cords. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. I stood in the doorway. We didn't speak at first. Then, finally, he asked, "How long were you planning all this?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because it didn't really matter. He said he thought I came to be with family. I told him I had. I still believed in family. Just not the kind where love and care only move in one direction. He nodded. Not like he agreed. Not like he understood. Just a small, tired nod. Like he heard me. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said he knew what they had done. The asking. The pressure. The slow way they chipped away at my boundaries. He said it had gone too far. He didn't say sorry. He just said it like it was a fact. His voice was steady. Flat. And I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won. It felt more like a kind of sadness, the kind that hits when someone you love finally sees the truth you've known for a long time, but only after everything has already changed. I told him I wasn't leaving. Because I stopped loving them. I was leaving because I had finally started loving myself again. That line didn't seem to affect him. He didn't argue. He didn't react at all. We stood there quietly for a moment, then I turned and started walking toward the house. Just before I reached the door, he said one last thing. He told me he always thought I'd be the one to outlast everyone. That I'd always be there. I didn't stop, but I heard him. And I carried those words with me, through the kitchen, down the stairs, into that basement that never really felt like mine. He didn't say sorry. He didn't try to fix things. But for the first time, he spoke without spinning it into something else. No excuses. No act. Just the truth he finally saw. And maybe that was the part of him I'd been waiting for, the part that finally understood I'd been there the whole time, even when he chose not to see me. It wasn't closure. It wasn't healing. But it was real. And for now, that was enough. The night before I left, I packed in silence. It didn't take long. Most of what I brought had stayed folded in my suitcase the whole time. I'd only used what I needed, just enough to get by. It hit me how little space I had taken up there, how carefully I had tried not to disturb anything. The basement felt heavier than usual, even with the lights on. I moved slowly, folding my clothes neatly, lining up my shoes, zipping my bags without rushing. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. Just steady, like someone who had finally stopped waiting for things to get better. I left the sheets folded at the end of the bed, clean, just like they were when I arrived. Upstairs, the house was quiet. No one said goodnight. Mason stayed in the garage. Heather went to bed early. Molly had been out with a friend all day. It was a clean break. No drama. No final words. Just quiet. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter before going to sleep. Inside was a letter I wrote by hand. I didn't list everything that had gone wrong. I didn't explain myself. I just said goodbye. I told them I wished them well. I told them I hoped they'd learn to love without trying to control everything. And I said that most of all, I was choosing peace. I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving because I remembered how to walk on my own again. The next morning, I left before the sun came up. The air was cool, the street still wrapped in night. I rolled my suitcase across the driveway, the wheels clicking softly on the concrete. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The cab driver didn't ask questions, just smiled, helped with my bag, and kept the radio low. As we pulled away, I looked at my hands resting in my lap. For the first time in a long while, they felt light. Not carrying anything. Not reaching out. Just resting. I didn't have a big plan. I just had a key in my pocket, to a small apartment. Across town. And that was enough. Leaving wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and clear, a door finally closed that should have been shut long ago. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is leave without needing applause. Just take what's hers and go. The apartment was small. One bedroom, a little kitchen, and a window that caught the morning sun just right, the kind of light that makes old things feel warm again. I hung a few pictures, put my books on a shelf, and unpacked my dishes like I was building a life that could actually last. There wasn't some big moment. No celebration. Just a long, deep breath and the quiet joy of knowing I was exactly where I chose to be. Most days, I walked to the park nearby. Sometimes I sat on a bench by the fountain and watched people pass by, moms with strollers, older folks feeding birds, teens with headphones lost in their own worlds. And I didn't feel lonely. I felt present. I joined a small local group that offered money management classes for older women. It wasn't anything fancy, just a whiteboard, some folding chairs, and a dozen women who reminded me of myself. Some had heavier stories. Some were just now realizing how much staying silent had cost them. I didn't lead the group. I just listened. One day, I finally spoke up. I told the women in the group about the house, about living in that basement, and about the moment I realized I didn't have to make myself small just to be accepted. A few of them nodded like they understood. One woman cried, not because she was sad, but because she knew exactly what I meant. That moment was enough. I wasn't trying to fix the past or get back what I'd lost. I was learning how to live. With what I still had, my self-respect, my clarity, and a voice that didn't need anyone's permission anymore. Every now and then, Mason would text me. Just little updates. His messages were short, polite. No big apologies, just small ways of reminding me he still existed. I replied when it felt right. No anger, no pretending, just space. And that space? It belonged to me now. I didn't explain myself anymore. I didn't waste energy trying to be understood by people who never truly listened in the first place. What I carried with me wasn't anger. It was my name. My breath. The deep understanding that real peace never asks you to lose yourself. It waits, quietly, patiently, for you to come back to who you've always been. If this story found you at a moment when you needed it, I hope it gave you more than just something to read. Maybe it helped you feel your own quiet strength again. Maybe it opened a door you thought was locked forever. If you've ever had to walk away from a place or a person who couldn't see your worth, or if you're still figuring out how, just know this, you're not alone. And if anything I've shared stayed with you, I'd really love to hear what part of it did. Let me know where it landed in your heart.